All right, terrific. Well, I would like to welcome you. I'm Luke McGowan on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies. I'm happy to welcome you to this local infrastructure hub event. I'll just say at the top, I've worked in local government as a grant manager where many of you are sitting, and I wish I had had access to this resource because, like all of us, I want to bring resources home to my community to help get the job done for residents, especially now as there's so much funding available out there. Just to give you a sense of what the local infrastructure hub does, it's a national hub to connect cities and towns with the resources and expert advice they need to access federal infrastructure funding. This helps them drive local progress, improve communities, and deliver results for residents. This program offers robust boot camp style experiences. These are free pro bono, targeted at small and mid-sized communities that are looking to pursue federal opportunities and get that grant guidance that they need. So today, you are here in the second in a series on a deep dive into the Clean Ports program at the EPA. This webinar is designed for Clean Ports program participants, which could include cities and port authorities. It will provide you with clear, actionable steps to develop a competitive application, help you engage with surrounding communities that are impacted by port pollution, and help align projects with EPA's program requirements. You also have the opportunity to hear from experts who have really done the work of diving deep into this program and its requirements to help you with your grants. So now, if you can go to the next slide, I am just happy to introduce some of the folks, and you can go to the next slide, who will be speaking to you today. So first will be from the Electrification Coalition, Will Marshall, who's the Freight Program Manager at EC. He supports efforts to advance electrification of the goods movement industry and other critical EV policies and programs. He'll also be joined by Gerald Brito, who's a program associate with the Electrification Coalition's Freight Electrification team. And I think just really important, this is not just water ports, this is dry ports, this is anything associated with potentially pollution production in port infrastructure. Next slide. After the Electrification Coalition, you'll hear from experts from the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, who will be talking specifically about community engagement, how you should be engaging your communities to strengthen your grant application. So first, you'll hear from Tracy Kolunga, who's a Civic Engagement Director for the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins. She leads a growing practice there, and also importantly is a 16-year veteran of city government in Long Beach, California. Joseph Cruz will be also joining from the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, has deep experience in community engagement, and will also be presenting today. Finally, rounding us out from the National League of Cities, Justin Edwards leads the data framework development and analysis for the NLC's Institute for Youth Education and Families. He is a veteran of many different boot camps and knows very well how to help cities structure their data as they are seeking federal grants. So after the speakers, we'll have some time for engagement and questions. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues at the Electrification Coalition. Take it away, Will.
I'm actually going to get started for us. But yeah, thank you for the lovely intro, Luke. And so, yeah, like you said, I'm Gerald Brito. I'm Program Associate at the Electrification Coalition, work with Will Marshall on our freight team. And just a little bit of background on the Electrification Coalition. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting the adoption of electric vehicles for the purposes of economic and national security challenges, as well as the public health and environmental benefits, really stemming from our dependence on oil. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to do a quick recap on the Clean Ports program. I know there's a recorded version of our previous webinar on the topic, and also the EPA has released a lot of great material out there on their Clean Ports program. But to just do a quick summary again, it is a new $3 billion program that focuses on shifting ports towards zero emissions. So this is split up into two buckets, one being the zero emission technology deployment competition and the climate and air quality planning competition. And as you can see there at the bottom, the deadline is fast approaching. We have just a bit over a month until that is due. Next slide, please. So eligible applicants to this program include port authorities, state, regional, local, or tribal agencies who have jurisdiction over a port authority or a port, air pollution control agencies, and importantly, private entities can also join this competition as an applicant, but they must apply in partnership with an eligible public entity listed above. So they can be a subrecipient to this program as well. Next slide. So the zero emission technology deployment competition is really the bulk of this program. It makes up the vast majority of the funding, and this is really targeted to deploying battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell technologies, as well as their supporting infrastructure. So the three broad categories of activities include the zero emission mobile equipment, the zero emission infrastructure that serves that mobile equipment, as well as the support activities for that, including administration and workforce development. Next slide, please. So like I said, this is the biggest part of it. At 2.79 billion is in the deployment of technology. And so depending on the size of the project, it can fall into different tiers. Tier A, B, and C. So they expect to award between 32 and 90 grants across all these different tiers. There are specific carve-outs for small water ports as well as dry ports. Like Luke mentioned, the focus is not just seaports, but also inland river ports, as well as dry ports like intermodal rail truck facilities. Next slide. And then the climate and air quality planning competition, while this is a smaller pot of the funding, they still do anticipate awarding 50 to 70 grants through this competition. And so activities included in this include an emissions inventory and accounting exercise. So all projects under this competition must include those. They can also include strategy analysis and goal setting, stakeholder collaboration and communication, as well as resilience planning. Next slide. So with that said, I know we went through this really quickly, but our goal here is really to talk through the opportunities for cities to engage with this program, and kind of with understanding that this program is the deadline for it is coming soon. Also taking those learnings, not just for the Clean Ports program, but moving forward for other federal applications. So key things here, get to know your port authority. You really need to identify the key stakeholders throughout all the various sections of port operations. Like I mentioned, identifying opportunities for future opportunities for grant funding, including your local climate action plans or other stakeholder collaboration. Secondly, if you are prepared, apply. So you can either be the lead applicant, like I said, if you are a public agency, as long as you have jurisdiction over a port. And you can also be a subrecipient if you are a private entity. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Will to go into a deeper dive on the how-tos of this program.
Great, thank you so much, Gerald. So thanks for providing that recap of the Clean Ports program and how cities can get involved. And so with that, just wanted to do a deeper dive into the application process. And if you are applying, what you can expect. So I do want to flag that, by having these projects developed and looking at all the criteria that I'll go through, it's going to be really helpful to look at not just this program, but the other future federal funding programs that are out there related to port electrification. As Gerald mentioned, this is a one-time funding opportunity. So if you're not prepared for this funding opportunity, there are other grant programs out there that are related to port electrification. So better to be more prepared and build out those relationships with your port authorities for those future opportunities. So with that, I just wanted to flag 3 things to keep in mind. If you are planning on applying for the program, applications must be submitted ahead of that May 28th deadline. Eligible applicants may apply to and receive both funding from both of the different competitions. So both the zero emission technology deployment competition as well as the climate and air quality planning competitions. However, you do need to submit 2 separate applications. And then also looking at the type of material that you'll need to submit, there's a required forms and documents, as well as some optional forms and documents that you'll need to apply to depending on the competition and what is included in your project. I highly recommend you check out those notice of funding opportunity, as they'll provide a greater list. Next slide. So bulk of your application is the project narrative. So I want to use this time to kind of go through that. First is the cover page, pretty standard, just a high level summary of your project, how much you're requesting, which of the 2 competitions you're applying to, and if you are looking to kind of pair this opportunity with another source of federal funding. Next slide. So the first section is the project summary and approach. And as I go through each of these different sections, I won't go over each component of them. It'll take way too long, and you can check it out at each of the NOFOs. But I do want to pull out some of those key components are required in each section, especially those that relate to some of the presentations that we'll have after hours from Tracy and Joseph, as well as from Justin. And on each slide, you'll be able to see, how many points the EPA will be awarding for each of those different types of activities. So like I mentioned earlier, and Gerald mentioned, really talking to your port partners, and how you can develop, a great opportunity with different, partnerships. So that is a key component of this first section, demonstrating that you're working with the appropriate partners and how to effectively implement your proposed project. Second key item to pull out is the coordination with complementary initiatives. This is coordinating with other programs or initiatives and leveraging those resources, as well as different funding opportunities to support your proposed project. There was a flurry of announcements earlier today from the administration on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. There's been announcements, quite a bit. So examples of this is demonstrating how your proposed project is connected with the recently announced National Zero Emission Freight Corridor Strategy that was released by the Joint Office earlier this year, or how a project can be complemented by federal funds from other sources, whether that's the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, the Port Infrastructure Development Program, or the Reduction of Truck Emissions at Port Facilities Grant Program, which we just saw the first awards get announced earlier today. Next slide. So the second section is outcomes, outputs, and performance measures. So this is so in addition to including these measures into an application, just wanted to flag the scrappage component that will be evaluated as part of the zero emission deployment competition. This is not a requirement like some other programs at the EPA, but it will ultimately score a project higher. So applicants will get full points for scrapping. 1-to-1 from diesel to zero emission equipment, or you can receive partial awards as well. Next slide. So section 3 is a programmatic capability and past performance, and this includes sharing what other federal funding you have been funded, or non-federal funds that you have received, as well as demonstrating the staff's knowledge, expertise, and qualifications when it comes to a Clean Ports Program application. Next slide. So the fourth section of this application, one of the more critical components of an application is the environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. I know we'll talk a little bit about that later from our index presenters, but did just want to flag these. So projects are located in non-attainment areas or demonstrate that they're located in non-attainment areas or areas with air quality concerns. Those will ultimately score higher. I do want to remind folks that there is a statutory requirement in this program where a specific specific amount of the funding must be awarded to projects that are in non-attainment areas. So $750 million of the $3 billion must go towards non-attainment areas. Additionally, this section looks at community engagement. And the EPA is pretty intentional about the role that community engagement is going to play in an application. So it's not just engaging, coordinating with community groups prior to the application as well as during the project, but also showcasing that there is that commitment to long-term community engagement. And the NOFO does a great job of illustrating what those different types of long-term engagements may include. Next slide. Moving to the next section, this area is more kind of in Justin's presentation on project sustainability. So this is really for the zero emission technology deployment competition. Applications to describe the publicly available baseline information on mobile source emissions, as well as a plan to reduce those emissions. The climate and air quality planning competition doesn't require those two types of activities since they will be funded as part of that competition. Next slide. Another priority in this program is looking at job quality as well as workforce development. So the EPA is looking for these proposed projects to support job creation, especially high quality jobs, as well as expanding the access of these jobs for those in low income communities as well as disadvantaged near port communities. So really localizing the benefits that come from this federal funding. Next slide. So this section is unique to the zero emission technology deployment competition, looking at project resilience, since this competition is the one that is funding the technologies and the climate and air quality planning grant program. That will, a part of that will actually include project resilience, as Gerald mentioned earlier. Next slide. So the last section is looking at the budget. Keep in mind the zero emission technology deployment competition. There is a mandatory cost share that is dependent on the proposed project size. And the NOFO provides a good example of what a budget should look like if this is something that you're interested in applying to. Looking at the reasonableness of costs, EPA will evaluate how the project budget is going to, based on the applicant's narrative and whether they'd be able to justify that requested funding. And I do also just want to flag that in an application as it relates to your budget, while there is no official cap on how much of an application the funding requirement can go towards infrastructure, for example, applicants are encouraged to use no more than 50% of funds for infrastructure, excluding shore power, as well as zero emission technology support activities like workforce development and project administration, really focusing in on those investments in the mobile equipment, the zero emission vehicle equipment, and those projects will score higher. Next slide. And so here, the last section, just looking at some of the attachments. These are some of those optional documents that depend on your application, as well as any supplemental documents that are required as part of your application. All the documents other than the documentation of partnership with utilities are for both applications, both competitions, so highly recommend you take a look. Again, strongly encourage you to take a look at the NOFO. It does a great, much better job describing those different requirements for each of those sections. So that wraps up our presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us today and learning a little bit more about the Clean Ports program. So with that, I will turn it over to Tracy and Joseph with the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Oh, Tracy, I don't know if you wanted to. Okay. Thank you so much, Will and Gerald. Appreciate that overview. I'll go ahead and kick us off, and then I'll hand it over to Tracy. Again, my name is Joseph Cruz, Civic Engagement Practice Administrator for the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation. And we're so excited today to talk about one of our favorite topics to present on, which is how to engage the community with innovative and creative strategies and techniques. So as today, we'll be sharing a brief presentation on how to create a community engagement plan. So you can go to the next slide. So as Will was just going over, we have some of the information here regarding from the NOFO regarding the grant selection criteria in relation to the community engagement portion of your application. So the first section we want to focus on is the community engagement prior to application and during projects, which we can see has a possible point total of 7. So you will want to detail your results from a community engagement process with local residents to discuss port operations and community concerns and interests related to zero emission technology deployment. Some of the options that they list here are using the charrette method, focus groups, key person interviews, public hearings, and surveys, as well as any efforts made prior to the application to build community consensus around the proposed project to meet the interests of port stakeholders and or identify community priorities and benefits related to the project. You can go to the next slide. On the next slide, you'll see here the grant selection criteria in relation to long-term community engagement. So you will want to describe an established long-term policy or process for meaningful community engagement, particularly with disadvantaged communities. That piece is really, really important to get community input on port operations and projects that impact air quality and address community concerns. Or if you don't have such policies or processes in place, you can describe your plans to establish such a policy or process before the end of the project period. So some of those examples of long-term community engagement include, but are not limited to, you can identify a community engagement liaison or an equity program director who is responsible for assisting port staff with their long-term community engagement, a community advisory committee, or other standing forums for two-way engagement that includes representation from local residents and local community groups. You can also implement a clear point of contact in a public forum. So this could be a hotline or a website, a place where community issues and feedback and complaints are to be addressed. And lastly, a budget to support community engagement training for staff. So all of the examples that I just listed are in the NOFO. We encourage you to take a look and ensure your community engagement plan is aligned in order to receive the most points possible. So you can go to the next slide. So as we continue on this conversation regarding how to create a community engagement plan, I believe it's really important that we start by asking this question here, which is, what is community engagement? So as you read through the slide, you will notice some very important attributes that make up a beautiful picture of effective and meaningful community engagement. In other words, meaningful community engagement should absolutely have, number one, representation from the whole community. So not just a small voice, but you want to hear from all people. It's a two-way dialogue, open dialogue that creates opportunities for collective solutions. It's about offering an effective, inclusive approach, seeking diverse opinions, and ultimately, you will hear this phrase commonly when you referenced, but you want to engage community early and often. And so it should be looked at as an ongoing conversation that will allow communities to help define and shape the city's future. So in short, it is a growing and developing relationship between city government and the community of residents that are being served. So now, as we keep all of this as our foundation, I want to go to the next slide and just talk about a few steps in regards to how we can begin developing our community engagement plan. So very similar to that project narrative, you will want to create and develop a project brief in regards to your community engagement strategy and your plan. So it's important to ensure that all community engagement activities are grounded in a mutually agreed upon project brief, so that all internal team members and external members of the public are on the same page in regards to the proposed project that you'll be working on, and all elements of the grant proposal are clearly communicated and reflected. So you see the list here that's reflected. So this project brief should, in essence, really become your talking points for all of the key stakeholders for your project. And so we recommend keeping this document to no more than 1 to 2 pages max, something that you'll be able to talk through and share with different internal and external stakeholders. So you can see the long list here of different headers and things that you can keep in mind regarding key information about your project, information about the grant, so on and so forth. We can go to the next slide. So once you have developed your project brief, you have your talking points, you have all this information in a clear and concise place. The next and equally important part of the process will be to create your core project team. You will need a project lead. Now, this may be you or maybe someone else on your team. You will also need a project manager, someone on the back end who's moving the list of tasks forward and keeping everything and everyone on target. Sometimes the lead and the project manager may be the same person, depending on the size of your team. That is completely okay. But you want to make sure that those roles are clear and defined. You will also want a community engagement expert. So these are the outgoing people typically who have many relationships within the city. So for example, in the city of Albany, New York, they had a neighborhood specialist on staff who was already working with the community, providing support for many grant projects. And this person is a really, really key partner in relation to developing community engagement strategies and how do you engage and activate those relationships. There may be already somebody that you are aware of, but making sure to keep in mind, to identify those people. You will also want a subject matter expert. So this is the person who is really an expert in the nature of the grant, nature of the project. Maybe there's been other similar projects that have been worked on, and you want to figure out if you can activate that person to be a part of this core project team. What's really important is what makes a great and successful project is a strong and connected team. So that's why we really want to make sure that you think about this. And I would really encourage you, if you already have names and people that you want to consider activating, start writing those down as we go about the rest of our presentation. And with that, we can go to the next slide and I will turn it over to Tracy.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that. So now in this portion of community engagement, we're going to talk about asset mapping as a part of your work. Again, my name is Tracy Kolunga, and I'm the Civic Engagement Director here at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation. Asset mapping is really rooted in asset-based community development, which was pioneered by John Kretzmann and John McKnight out of the University of Chicago. It really takes that traditional approach of community development and flips it on its head. Instead of the traditional approach of looking at community needs, deficiencies, and problems, we're going to teach you how to put on your rose-colored lenses and really look at the community from an assets-based lens. We'll go to the next slide, please. So here on this slide, you can see the traditional path. Historically, when we talk about serving underserved neighborhoods, people have talked about them, oh, that's a neighborhood with problems. There's unemployment, gangs, truancy, broken families, crime. We want to help flip that conversation and start to look at the community with a new lens. These are people with gifts and dreams. There may be young entrepreneurs or elderly people who are passionate about having green ports, having healthy air quality for their children or grandchildren. There may be churches, schools, businesses, parks and public libraries, police stations. How can you start to activate the assets in the community to be a part of your external collaborators and partners on this particular grant? So we're going to go on to the next slide. So a great way to do that, and you can start jotting some ideas now, is really starting to uncover the assets in your city or around your harbor department or port authority, as well as the specific neighborhoods you want to target. For instance, in the city of Long Beach, we launched the Green Ports program, and you'll see a link in the chat in just a moment, where we activated different partners across the asset mapping list. So again, I encourage you to start jotting some ideas down now. First are the assets of individuals. Who are the people who are professional experts? Maybe they're professors at the local university, maybe they're advocates, and they show up to city council or community meetings to talk about their concern for the air quality or having a green port. These individuals actually can become your biggest motivators and your biggest allies. So, word of the day, Let's turn our enemies into our allies. Yes, I worked in City of Long Beach for many years, and there were people who came to council with their concerns. If you can figure out how to activate their strengths and be a key partner in attending community meetings and maybe even helping you facilitate community forums to get input from the neighborhood you're focused on. The next piece are institutional assets. How can you activate your local churches? Your college and universities are full of young people who want to be a part of climate action. How can you activate student groups? Maybe the fire department or the local hospital or library is willing to host your community meeting in that focused neighborhood. Again, think outside of the box. Maybe the local police department wants to be engaged. I know that may sound wild, but our police chief in Long Beach, he was engaged in not just reducing the crime rate, but increasing the high school graduation rate. You never know who are your department heads or chief executives in your city who actually care about climate, and you can activate them to be voices in this project. Also, you want to look at organizational assets. Think about the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, PTA. There are so many different nonprofits and community groups, citizen groups that want to be activated around this particular issue. Start jotting down that list now. Again, how can you activate these groups to be partners on this grant application and to come to your community conversations? Again, think about your federal and state assets. Is there federal or state property? Are there military bases? In El Paso, Texas, they engage their local military base to be a part of their local action. So again, think outside of the box of who you can advocate. Maybe there are state agencies that would also complement your federal funding or private foundation nonprofits. Also, look at your physical and land assets. How can you activate agriculture in Long Beach? The port in Long Beach is just adjacent to the ocean, of course, but there's also a long stretch of green space that the community has been reinventing alongside the port and the city of Long Beach to continue the green port concept. And last but not least, your cultural assets. This is important. If you're serving disinvested neighborhoods that are maybe predominantly Latino or African American or immigrants from another country, it's important to partner with those cultural groups so they can help with language translation. They can help organize that particular community and or educate them on what is a green port, what is ZE technology. So again, we want you to jot down right now how you can activate these different assets in your community. So this asset list then becomes your invitation list for your community meeting. One thing we did in Long Beach is we partnered with our local colleges and universities. They helped us do this asset map as a part of their urban planning class. And they also helped us develop an email invitation list and phone call database to invite people to our community meetings. So we can go to the next slide, please. Which leads us to the next component of the community engagement workbook, which is selecting your community engagement techniques. Now, on our Cities of Service website, we have 12 different techniques that you can choose from. Each of them come with a quick, easy-to-use guide on how you can activate community members and get their input. Here's another key word for the day: make community meetings not boring. So public meetings historically have been very didactic. There's one person in the front of the room and then another person in the crowd, and they like to go back and forth about whatever the hot topic is. Again, I worked in city government for 16 years. I know how boring these meetings can be. What we're going to teach you here in these different techniques is how to activate various residents who are concerned about this issue and really build a collaborative model to have a conversation. For instance, in the website, you can find the World Cafe, where you move people to 4 parts of the room, and in 20-minute increments, you take them into a facilitated guided conversation about what they would like to see in a green port, or how they would like to be a part of that solution. Again, we give you sample questions and methodologies to use. Another one I love is mobile ethnography. So in the city of Mobile, Alabama, they used Instagram to map out all of their blighted neighborhoods. I know Instagram has its feature now where you can actually do a poll. What would it look like if you engaged your millennials and your Zs via an Instagram poll that the mayor or your city social media account puts out? Think differently about how to make public engagement not boring. All right, let's go on to the next slide, please. So this is our bonus round, and if I had a cowbell, I would ring it right now. This is where you can get extra points on your application. How can you activate your elected officials? Again, I wrote grants and managed federal grants for the city for many years. So number one, low-hanging fruit, get a letter of support from your member of Congress, your senators. Ask for a briefing session, whether it be your government affairs director or someone in your mayor's city manager's office. Ask permission to go brief your federal elected official about your grant application. That's a great way to build buy-in. Invite the elected official to send a staff member to a planning committee or to those community engagement meetings. You better believe they're going to want to welcome the constituents on behalf of this potential project. Invite them to a press conference and, of course, the ribbon cutting when you get the grant. Also, when you think of community engagement, it's important to think about offering support for the people attending. So if we're going to make the meetings not boring, we need to figure out a way to make them fun. Can you have refreshments maybe offered by your local Starbucks who has a corporate giving venture, or maybe a small business who wants to donate refreshments for your meeting? Offer interpretation and sign language, transportation, childcare. In Long Beach, we partner with Parks and Rec, and they provided childcare for children 5 to 12. So again, think outside of the box about different supports that you can bring in to make these community engagement events fun. Also, you may have your local airport or your port authority or harbor department may have free giveaways that they can give away as a part of your public meeting. Again, make it fun. Again, in El Paso, Texas, they like to bring a DJ to all their community meetings, and they have salsa playing in the background to get everybody excited about the conversation. So think outside of the box on how you want to engage your community members. And next slide, please. So, and last but not least, we want to introduce to you the Local Infrastructure Hub Community Engagement Workbook. This is a comprehensive workbook that covers all the steps that we just shared in their entirety. Again, it teaches you how to develop a project brief, select a core project team, complete your asset mapping, possibly in partnership with your local college students, and last but not least, selecting and implementing your civic engagement techniques. We hope these resources are helpful as you move forward your grant application. I would now like to turn it over to my colleague, Justin Edwards.
Thanks, Tracy and Joseph. Really happy to be here. Again, I'm Justin Edwards. I'm the data director with the National League of Cities Lead Institute with Youth Education and Families. And I play a large role in developing a lot of data products that have helped support some of the boot camps and other activities of the Local Infrastructure Hub. So we're turning to the point now where data is going to become very crucial to just satisfying both some of those eligibility criteria that Will and Gerald, Tracy, and Joseph have covered already. And then also how we can use data to actually sort of enhance even some of these other strategies. There's a very strong relationship, I think, with the community engagement processes that you'll be developing throughout throughout your approach, and also how data might be able to help you sort of articulate your approach to those community-based assets, but then also how they can continue to tell your story with ongoing engagement. Starting off, an effective data utilization strategy, if we can go back to the previous slide, is very crucial and critical to winning federal grants within the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. Data underpins many of the administration's central priorities. Especially when we're thinking about incorporating equity through our projects funded through BIL, IRA, and other programs. Data will play a pivotal role in enhancing the competitiveness of your application. Not just using data to describe populations that will be impacted, but also to justify why your particular project matters deeply to that community. Maybe that community has been historically underinvested or disinvested, and that we can use data to really track and expand what have been the long-term evolutionary sort of impacts of that disinvestment. Has it been a place where we see a continued growing health crisis emerging, or otherwise consistently blocking, levels of opportunity to marginalized communities across your city? So it's really about utilizing data to build, a very persuasive story about the people and the lived experience in your community, but also about impacts that your project can drive. And data is really going to enable you to develop, a very rigorous sort of analysis of what does it mean to be a disadvantaged community or an underserved community. It's going to look very different in communities all across the country, as well as in neighborhoods within your city as well. And so one particular project may be able to drive a workforce development, growth in one area of the city, whereas it may actually help improve air quality more broadly. It's important to be able to track those, multiple impacts and actually measure them over time. Thinking about this, approach and what we mean and where we source data, if we go to the next slide, it's very critical to kind of in the back of your mind when you're working with some of the sets that we're going to showcase here, but also utilizing some of your own local data. This is just a sort of a 5-point checklist we like to remind folks to think about as they're considering, is this valuable? Will this be, providing a solid baseline for me to be able to talk about this issue? If you think about where is the framing on this data itself, right? Transparency around the organizations who collected the data, and any potential bias that might have been introduced by an organization when that data was collected or how that data was collected is going to be very important. Sourcing will go through a couple particular data platforms that will be necessary to kind of check the box on eligibility. But then also, if you think about utilizing other data, you want to make sure that you're using a secondary trusted source, or that the source that you're using from a local perspective is one that is able to articulate how that data is collected and actually has very rigorous methodologies in using it. You want to be able to analyze and present findings really that can kind of engage people in a way that really can actually help articulate and paint this picture around equity, especially. There are a lot of sort of editorialized composite indicators out there that can quickly give you an answer of this is an equity issue and by this particular perspective. However, taking some time and thinking against other variables that you might be able to do to just sort of like vet the analysis that you're starting to produce is going to be very helpful as well to make sure that you're coming out from a standpoint of credibility and rigor. And then thinking about the interpretation of this, consider what types of policies might play a role in impacting both the direction of a data point that you've already collected or changes in policies that might be able to influence a different direction. Maybe challenging some assumptions around, majority rule outcome. So everybody hits 100 here. Maybe identifying where there's a best performing community in your city and saying, this is where we're seeing some of the strongest outcomes, and thinking about rising others to an evidence of success as measured already within your city. And then, ultimately, when we use data, it's not necessarily about throwing a myriad number of statistics against the wall and hoping people can disentangle the story themselves. It's really about building a narrative around that. And remembering that when we're utilizing population, focused data, we're talking about people. So we're looking about, really trying to be considerate about talking about scale, talking about who's being impacted, where are they in their stage of life, what is that particular community you're trying to tell a story around through the use of data? How does it differ with another community utilizing those same data points? And how can you talk about sort of their shared challenges or maybe their shared successes? Turning to the next slide, there are some very specific points that I want to make sure are very clear here, especially in determining whether or not your project is impacting disadvantaged communities. In order to, score the highest on this particular topic, your project must meet both criteria. So in the first criteria, basically any county that includes at least one of the following three here will tick the box on that first criteria. So if you have a census tract that is identified as disadvantaged in the climate and economic justice screening tool, and I think we can drop a link here, or any census block group that's above the 90th percentile for the EJ screens supplemental indices if when compared to the nation or state. And that'll become clear. I'll show you a couple screenshots and you can use the tool yourself. Or if your project is going to be sited in an area within tribal lands as identified by the EJ screen. There's a link here also on the EPA site that actually lists out every county, and it has these 3 criteria, and you can find your county and actually kind of cross-tabulate. But I encourage you, if you go to the next slide, to really spend some time on this tool, this climate and economic justice screening tool, because not only will it let you know here on the right side of the screenshot, you can see, is this census tract identified as disadvantaged? And in fact, it's yes. But it has a lot of sub indices below it that look at various indicators around climate change issues, around energy sustainability, health outcomes, the picture of the landscape around housing, affordability, and quality. And it will give you some additional data points to really consider when you're thinking about telling a more nuanced bit of your story. Let's go to the next slide. So you can basically take one of those, sub indices and unpack it even further. Here you can see from a housing perspective, this particular census tract has historically been underinvested, and it gives you sort of where that particular tract ranks within the national percentile. You can look at costs and lack of utilities and other issues as well. If we go to the next slide. So the second criteria that you're going to need to meet in order to qualify in that disadvantaged community gets a little bit more complicated, but we've got the sources for you here. This is really looking at the air quality measurements and some of the toxic screening assessment ratings. So if your county also meets either, it has one designated non-attainment area or maintenance area, that ticks the box on any of these national ambient air quality standards. And that's published in the EPA's Green Book. It's a pretty straightforward process. I'll show you here in a moment a screenshot of that tool. You should be able to find your county, your area, and then be able to navigate through a series of different pollutants. The second one is looking at the 2019 air toxic screening assessment and whether or not your county has any of census tracts that rank above the 80th percentile, which is the cutoff essentially to evaluate areas that determine need. And that particular tool, I think we've got the link here we can drop as well. If you go to the next slide, this is the EPA's Green Book. You're going to be able to navigate across a bunch of different pollutant categories, from ozone to carbon monoxide, the particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and others. So I encourage you to take a look at this. EPA's Green Book site actually has a really great tutorial on how to navigate this as well. And there's perhaps a couple different ways where you can even stack on sort of the magnitude of pollution as well when we start to think about building the overall community narrative. And the following slide, we'll just a real brief snapshot here. It's going to show you the air toxic screen mapping tool. So this is based on the assessments from 2019. Again, you can navigate down to a census tract anywhere in the country where measurements have been taken. And then you can really navigate there on the bottom left, the track location data. You can scroll through a series of assessment ratings, and it's going to give you the rating scores and the percentile rankings as well, which will match up for that eligibility. It'll give you the risk by source type here. You can see on the right side, you're going to be able to kind of navigate to exactly what it is you're you want to cite in that particular category. And then finally, there's a whole host of other tools available. The census, if you go to the next slide, if you just go to data.census.gov and start looking in the advanced search section and try to navigate to a census tract level or all the way up to your city aggregate, you're really going to be able to pull out some of those additional kind of population level metrics that are going to help provide that like solid, rigorous, statistical kind of way of telling an evidence-based story. And why that's important is when you think about the demonstration of need and you think about the demonstration of impact you're trying to make, you're actually creating a people-focused story that can be measured over time, because you will be doing this ongoing community engagement and perhaps needs might change. Pardon me. You want to be able to also demonstrate success with an impact on populations and air quality, of course, as your project sort of evolves over time as well. So really baking in some of these, these measures up front allow you, and they sort of create the runway for you to measure and continue to tell a consistent story. I think that's it from my side on the data perspective. So I guess I'll hand back over to our hosts.
Thank you, Justin, and to all our speakers. So now we can go to the next slide. If you are anything like me, you need to hear things multiple times, and sometimes you need to actually just have a conversation with someone to get the information you need. And so I wanted to flag that we are offering the opportunity for you to have one-on-one conversations with some of the experts on this program about your grant. You can come with any question at all to get answered. And so if you are at all considering applying for this program, working through any issues, please do feel free to take advantage of this resource. So if you could fill out that poll, and if what will happen is just after this webinar, we'll follow up to schedule a time that works for you and get you that information. So while you're answering that poll, I also just wanted to open it up. We have a few minutes left. If there are any questions on anything that was discussed, I will say there is no bad question. Anything you're thinking about, probably counterparts in other cities are thinking about, and certainly we benefit from knowing what is on your mind. So you can either drop a question in the chat, or I think we have a raise hand feature, so you can raise your hand and have you speak. So I'll give you a few seconds just in case there are any questions coming in. And again, in that chat, you'll see kind of links to all the resources that were discussed. So thank you to Chris and Sophie and the team who've been plugging those in. So unless there are any questions, and again, this is an open resource, kind of the experts on this program are ready to answer your questions today or later. So we can just move on to the next slide. So we just wanted to flag a few upcoming local infrastructure hub events that you might also be interested in. On Tuesday, April 30th at 2 o'clock, we will have a partnering with CBOs on advanced environmental justice issues workshop. Then next month on May 14th, we'll have a Bridges for Sustainable and Resilient Infrastructure webinar. And then on Wednesday, May 22nd, we will have a micro trenching, what I wish I'd known about new techniques for broadband construction session. I love the titles here. Kudos to whoever's coming up with that. So the final slide here before we can let you go is just wanted you to realize kind of the breadth of what's available in the local infrastructure hub. We are now open for registration over the next few weeks for our next round of boot camps. These are, again, designed specifically to be responsive to what the federal government has on offer today. So if you are interested in brownfields, bridge investments, rail crossing issues and rail safety improvements, reconnecting communities, or solid waste infrastructure for recycling grants, we are running boot camps on all of those programs. Again, if you're in local government, there is likely a problem that can be solved by the funds available through this program, through these programs, and the hub can help you file a successful grant. And I think we've helped over 1,300 cities leverage over $2 billion in federal grants thus far, and we want you to be the next city to win. So use that link, follow up by email. We really appreciate you participating in these sessions on clean ports. And so I think if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to thank all of our partners on the program, especially the National League of Cities, for their work here today. And with that, I will let you go and give you all a couple minutes back. Thank you.